In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a messenger bag, and the pieces you'll need are the bag front, and with this you're going to cut out one piece from your fashion fabric, the bag back, which is one piece from fashion fabric, the flap, one piece from fashion fabric, flap facing, which is fashion fabric, cut one, patch pocket, where you were going to cut this from your lining, then the lining, which is the inside of the bag, you're going to cut two from this piece, the long strap, this is going to be cut one on a fold, so it'll be twice as long as this, and then the short strap, cut one at this length. Now the fabric I'm using is a canvas, and I want to explain something. When I made my first bag, it was a solid piece. It wasn't a print like this, and when I used the solid fabric, I was able to lay this down like this and then cut it out as one piece, because if I had my choice, I would not have a seam at the bottom, because cutting it to me just weakens it. Even though you're sewing it up again, I prefer to not have a seam at all. So that was one piece. But because I have this directional print, I had to cut it in two pieces, because if you fold it, then one side will be upside down, the other side would be right side up. So I did that. And then for the lining, I used a black taffeta. And the reason why I chose a taffeta is because it has more body. On my other bag, I used just a satin lining, and I didn't like that because there's not much body to it. So I chose this, and you'll see when I cut out the pattern that I didn't pin it down, because this is so tightly woven. It was hard to get my pins into, so I just kind of weighted it down and used my rotary cutter and cut it all out. So these are the pieces you're going to need, and let's get started. Okay, right here I am trying to place the front flap, because this is what you're going to see when you first see the bag. This will be the outside. And this is the strap, the small strap, and that doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter where that goes. And so here I'm trying to decide, do I want to see the Eiffel Tower? Do I want to see the hot air balloon? And making sure that the direction is correct. You can see on that front flap, the rounded corners, that's going to be the bottom. And this is the front of the bag where the notches are out, that's the bottom. So I'm just trying to make sure everything is in the correct place directionally. Okay, now I'm going to place the flap facing, and you'll see me turn it over and flip it around and trying to place it correctly, because what I was trying to do is make sure that when you see the flap facing, if anybody ever does, that it's going to be right side up. So when I place it, it actually has to be, the print has to be upside down. So you see the rounded corners, that's the bottom of the bag. So when you lift the bag, when you open the bag and that flap comes up, I want the print to be right side up. Even though nobody's going to pay attention to it and probably no one will ever notice it, I will notice it. So I was kind of doing this flip around thing, just trying to make sure that I got it right. Again, I'm just trying to decide what print I want on the back of the bag and to make sure it's centered or it looks the way I want it to look. And this part of the bag, you see that top notch where it's, I think it's 5 inches by 2 inches, and that's going to be the top part of the bag. The part on the right where you see the 2 by 2.5 inch notch, that's the bottom of the bag. So again, if you're working with a print, make sure that it's facing the right way directionally. Okay, now it's time to cut out your bag pieces. Okay, now I'm going to lay out my fusible interfacing with the fusible dots facing up. And because I placed the pattern pieces on the fabric with the fabric print facing up, now I can lay those pieces directly on the interfacing, and they'll already be ready to be pressed after I cut it out. The parts of the bag that you're going to interface are the bag front, the bag back, and the flap. Those are the only pieces that you need to interface. Okay, now that your pieces are all cut out, go ahead and take it to your ironing board and fuse these pieces with the interfacing. Okay, we're going to start with the straps, and what you're going to do is take your straps and fold it with the right sides together, and you're going to stitch 1/4 of an inch from the edge all the way down the length of it. Now, I didn't do a video on every little step because I'm trying to keep the video from being too long, but I stitched 1/4 of an inch, and then I went back and I did another stitch just to the right of that one. And then I took it to the ironing board and I pressed those seams, those seam allowances open, and then I turned the strap right side out, and then I pressed it again, making sure that that stitched edge is pulled out as far as it needs to be so that it's going to be straight all the way down. Okay, right here, I'm just trimming the edges of the seam allowance because I don't like loose threads. Now, you can see that right here, I've turned the strap right side out and now I'm going to top stitch. I'm going to start on the right hand side right here. I'm going to move the belt over and do the other side. It's very important that you do your straps like this. You sew, you edge on one side and then you slide the strap over and you do the other side. And if you're used to sewing with your garment or the item on your left hand side, it is a little weird shifting it over and doing it from the other side, but it's important that your belt stay in the same direction on both top stitching sides. Don't flip it and don't turn it around because your belt will start twisting and it won't lie flat. So just keep that in mind when you're sewing your straps, when you're top stitching. You can see how I just moved it over. I didn't turn it over and I didn't turn the belt around. Just keep that in mind. Okay, now it's time to put our slider on. And this is the first part you attach. And it's the slider with the 2 holes. And you put your strap through there and you're going to sew it to the middle rod between the 2 spaces, just like this. Okay, now we're going to work on the small strap and we're going to go through the same process. Right sides together, sew 1/4 of an inch from the edge, then go back and sew another stitch to the right of that one to reinforce that seam, and then press that seam allowance, turn your strap right side out, and then you're ready to do your top stitching. Again, top stitch one side, slide it over, top stitch the other side. Okay, now we're going to attach the short strap to the rectangular ring. I'm not really sure if that's the right name for that, but basically you just put the ring on the strap in the center and then you stitch right next to the ring so that it can't slide off. And that's it. Okay, this is where it gets fun. We're going to start assembling the bag. And what you need to do here is do a 1/2 inch seam allowance down the sides and a 1/2 inch seam allowance across the bottom. Okay, this next step is going to create the depth of the bag. You're going to reach in and open that notch, matching up the bottom seam and the side seam together. And just like this, match those up, and you're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Go from, just make sure you take it from one end to the other, don't leave any open spaces there, and then flip the bag over and do it for the other corner. I love this part because I can finally see the bag starting to come together. Now the next part we're going to do is attach the straps to the bag. So I have my long strap. And now here's my small strap, and I'm going to attach it here. I'm just going to put pins in it for now just to hold it. And I am trying to make sure that the side seam is in the center of that strap and that it's not off center or twisted. You know, you want it to be straight on. Now I'm going to slide the raw end of that, the long strap in, then it's going through my slider. So that one side is done. Now I'm going to take this raw edge here and attach it to the other side. I'm going to pin this in place, and then I'm going to run a stitch across the top to make sure it stays there, and then I can pull the pins out for when I attach the lining. Now I'm going to prep the pocket. The way I do this is I sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance down the sides and across the bottom. And then on the top, I'm going to fold it down about 3/4 of an inch, and I'm going to sew that down. And the reason why I do this is because when I go to sew the pocket onto the lining, I can fold on that stitching line and I know that it's going to be straight. Then I will pin it down, and then I'll just top stitch all the way around it from the side across the bottom and up the other side. Okay, now that I've sewn the sides and the bottom of the pocket, I took it to the ironing board and pressed those under on that stitching line so I know it's straight. And now I'm stitching the top of the pocket, and when I finish with that, I'll be ready to pin it to the lining and get it sewn in. Okay, now that the pocket is sewn into the lining, you're going to assemble the bag lining the way you did the outside of the bag, except for the bottom. Now you're going to sew up the sides with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you're going to sew the bottom with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but you're not going to sew all the way across. You'll start at one end and you'll sew in 1.5 inches, and then you'll go to the other end and you'll sew in 1.5 inches, leaving the very center of the bottom of the bag open so that when the bag is assembled, you can turn it right side out. Okay, now that the bag lining is finished, I am going to sew the flap to the back of the bag using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to go all the way across, and if you want, you can, when you're finished, you can press this out and pressing the seam allowance to towards the flap and do a top stitching if you like. Okay, what I failed to do when making this pattern is add notches and grain lines because I don't use them in my patterns. But what needs to happen is I'm going to sew this flap facing into the bag, the lining, and it needs to be centered towards the back of that bag lining. I'm placing it right sides together on the part of the bag that has the pocket that we just sewed in, that we have just sewn in, because I want the pocket to be on the back of the bag, not on the front of the bag. So I'm pinning this in place and I'm going to sew it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, now that the lining piece is all assembled, I'm going to just put it inside the bag and make sure that the flap facing and the flap line up and that the side seams line up and that everything looks good. If things aren't right at this point, there's still a chance, there's still time to make adjustments. But it looks really good, and I'm confident that it will come together nicely. So I'm taking the lining out, and this is where I showed you I should have left that open, but I didn't. So I had to take that seam out. Now I'm going to make my strap small because I'm going to attach the lining and I don't want that strap getting in the way. So with the right sides together, the lining and the bag, I'm going to start matching up side seams and the flap and flap facing. And then I will start pinning all the way around, up the flap, around the corners, and then towards the front of the bag, you're going to see where it looks like the bag is a little bit larger than the lining. So I will just with my fingers just distribute that little extra. It's not enough to even make adjustments to the bag. It's more like an ease. So with my fingers, I'll ease all that in, and then I will stitch all the way around the bag and up over the facing. Okay, now that you're finished sewing, you're going to clip your inverted corners like this and notch your rounded corners so that when you turn your bag right side out, there's not going to be any stress points and your bag is going to lie really flat and have a very professional look to it. Okay, the fun part is getting to turn the bag right side out. Reach all the way up into the flap and grab hold of that and just pull it through that hole. And once the bag is completely turned right side out, reach your hand back into the lining, up into the flap, and with your finger, run it along the seams and really push those out because that's what's going to give it a really nice look when you press it out. So I'm rolling my seam allowances because in the corners it's kind of hard, so you kind of just have to play with it. And I take it to the ironing board and I press it all out nice and flat, the flap and the top of the bag. And then take it to the machine and I'm going to top stitch it 1/4 of an inch all the way around. All right, we are in the home stretch. We have one more seam to do and we're done. Reach in and grab the bottom of your lining and just kind of do what I'm doing right here. You want to make sure the seams are folded in. Make sure they're nice and flat against each other. If you have to pin it, pin it. And we're going to stitch right across that line and we're done. So if you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up. If there is something else you would like to see, go ahead and leave it in the comment box below. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell so you're notified when I upload more videos. And if you guys make the bag, I would really appreciate it if you would leave a photo or a comment on how you liked it. It's always recommended that you watch a video through so you kind of know what to expect and then what you need for this task, and then go back and follow along with me. I hope you guys have a great day and I will see you in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks, you guys. Bye.